call the special meeting of the Board of Aldermen to order at 6:30 p.m. The prayer will be offered by City Clerk Patricia Pietzu, and Alderman Karen will lead us in the pledge to the flag.
Almighty God, we have the high honor and serious duty to manage the affairs of our beloved city. Fill us, O God, with a spirit of unity and understanding, which enables us to face our multiple problems with a serene mind, with justice and charity for all, so that any and all decisions made by us will always be for the betterment and greater happiness of all our fellow citizens. So help us, God. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Would the clerk please call the roll?
Alderman Wilshire. Here. Alderman Gidge. Alderman Harriet Gathright. Alderman Dowd.
Present.
Alderman Clee.
Here.
Alderman Laws. Here. Alderman Lopez. Alderman Karen.
Here.
Alderwoman Kelly. Here. Alderman Jettie.
Here.
Alderwoman Malizi Gola.
Present.
Alderman Tenza.
Present.
Alderman Schmidt.
Here.
Alderman O'Brien.
Present.
Alderman McCarthy.
Present.
We have 12 members present.
And let the record show that Alderwoman Harriet Gathright has joined us. Communications? Oh, actually, also in attendance are Corporation Counsel Stephen Bolton and Mayor James Donchis. Communications?
Communication from Brian S. McCarthy, President, Board of Aldermen, relative to a special Board of Aldermen meeting.
If there are no objections, the communication will be accepted and placed on file. The sole item on tonight's agenda is a discussion of the Performing Arts Center with Tim Cummings, Director of Economic Development, Tim, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. President. For the record, my name is Tim Cummings. I'm the Director of Economic Development for the city, and I'm here before you to give a general update on the progress relative to the Performing Arts Center. On your desks, you will have some various pieces of material. One is the PowerPoint for you to have as an overview to help guide the conversation. Second is the fundraising feasibility study that was just recently produced. And then thirdly is a draft strategic document for guidance relative to operations of the Performing Arts Center. Those are all bundled within a piece of collateral, a marketing brochure that was put together by our consultant who helped us throughout the summer, and I will get into more detail relative to assessing our private capital contribution assessment. So up on the screen before you is the cover page, and I put this up mainly for the viewing audience at home so they could actually see what it was that was done. I am trying to move the, oh, there we go. So there's the cover. There's the next page, basically talking about the creative economy. Then we talk about how it's, an impact, a positive economic impact within the state of New Hampshire, and then how it could be effective for us here in Nashua. Talking about the vision that we have for 201 Main Street, and then talking a little bit about the reasons why we want to move this forward. So that was a piece of material that was produced at the beginning of the summer, and it was the start of the scope of work that our consultant undertook with the feasibility study, and it was tested out in the marketplace with the fundraising assessment. So I wanted to, again, just make sure folks saw that. We're pretty proud of that piece. It's going to be tweaked based on the feedback that we got, but it was a good piece of material for us to help orientate our conversation with folks. To refresh everyone's memory, I was before you in I was before you in June, end of June of 2018, so this summer, with an update. And basically at that time, to refresh your memory, we were talking about engaging Full Circle Consulting to start the feasibility study. We outlined that it would take place through the summer. We thought that it would be completed in the fall, which is essentially where we are right now. Site visits occurred, approximately 10-ish various site visits to performing arts centers over the summer, and an RFQ was written and released seeking responses from both architectural and engineering and construction management firms. We've additionally met with a third-party management firm to have a due diligence session with the steering committee to discuss how best to develop an operational business model. We also engaged a new market tax credit consultant to help us assess and develop a plan for securing a new market tax credit. So where are we at right now? So first and foremost, we have the steering committee working and meeting regularly. And I wanted to just also encourage everyone who has an interest to get involved. We want everyone to feel as though they can participate and be involved in the conversation. At the end of the day, I say to folks that this is not my performing arts center. This is the city of Nashua's performing arts center. So we want to make sure that everyone feels as though that they are invested. So operations. We've met with various communities and we discussed differing methods on how performing arts centers are operated. We reviewed differing RFPs that were issued and contracts awarded within the last few years relative to management and operations of performing arts centers. We've continued our engagement with Duncan Webb, our performing arts center consultant. We've spoken to him on a couple times this summer to gain his advice relative to constructing an operation business model. We developed a strategic guiding document to help craft an RFP and to develop the operational guidelines. We've developed an RFP that will be released this week, and I'm hopeful that responses will be due at the end of October, seeking a third-party operator. Relative to design, we released an RFQ for both construction management and architectural and engineering firms. We received 10 responses from construction management firms, 12 responses from architectural and engineering firms. On October 8th, a meeting will be held with a subset of the steering committee to review the various responses and to plot the next steps. Ideally, we'll have a firm selected by mid-November. Relative to the fundraising, so in the report that goes into much greater detail will outline that the working group has a high level of confidence that the project will secure approximately $6.5 million in private sector funding, a projected $2.5 million through private charitable contributions and CDFA tax credits, and a projected $4 million from the sale of new market tax credits. So, in partnership with the working group, Full Circle Consulting developed a case for support to tell the story of why Nashua's Performing Arts Center is a worthy and charitable support, and then met with 30 individual businesses, institutions, and various backgrounds. That's the document that you have in front of you this evening. I also want to make sure it's clear that the various stakeholders that were that they met with were not just downtown merchants, that this was a broad cross-section of business owners and stakeholders throughout the entire city. 33% of those interviewed for this study described themselves as already involved in the arts and in Nashua, and 63% own or lead a business in the area, and 60% described themselves as actively interested in the future of downtown. 13% were all three. Those interviewed for the study were asked if they would consider a contribution in support of the campaign. 56% said yes, 22% said maybe, and 22% said no. So we are at essentially the campaign strategy phase of the document, or I should say the lead gift phase of the campaign, and that is essentially where we will be looking to raise approximately 70% of the targeted goal. So we are transitioning into that lead phase now, and that's still during, as I just outlined, we are in the campaign readiness phase. We are moving towards the lead gift phase, and then we will be moving to the major gift phase, the public phase, and then the appreciation phase to secure that private charitable individual contribution of approximately $2.5 million. So the one thing I want to make sure I also point out is during the lead gift phase and the major gift phase, those are quiet type phases. What do I mean by quiet? There's not a lot of discussions or public talk, because those are individual conversations with usually high net worth individuals or businesses or foundations where you are looking to secure the commitment. The bottom slide there, and I will change that for when it gets put up on the internet to a white font, but it basically outlines the timeline in a Gantt chart. So relative to the $4 million, city staff and a new market tax credit consultant have begun the process to apply for and secure an allocation of a new market tax credit. The expectation is that a letter of commitment in the second quarter of 2019 would be forthcoming, and cash would be available by the end of 2019. There's a memo in your packet that outlines this in greater detail. So next steps. It's imperative that we continue to position ourselves and focus on obtaining the new market tax credit. To do that, we need to be successful relative to the design and operations, and we need to make sure that we have those details finalized. We need to transition into the lead gift phase, which is a quiet phase, as I previously outlined, to secure somewhere between 60 and 70% of our target private charitable contribution. And then lastly, we need to continue working with the steering committee. So there's a conceptual rendering of what we are looking to achieve. And again, this is just an artistic rendering, and it's conceptual in nature. The details may not stay the same, but I wanted to remind folks of what we were working for relative to 201 Main Street. Before I finish out the presentation, I want to just make additional comments to help further clarify differing things or express some sentiments that have been brought up along the way. First, people have been talking about the time and the timeliness of where we're at. I want to just remind folks that we need to do this right. And to do this right, we needed to take a step back, we needed to assess our situation, and we needed to do our due diligence. And in fact, during the feasibility stage of the campaign, of the assessment, we heard from the public and from the various stakeholders that it was vital that this Performing Arts Center was quote unquote done right. And so that's the exact approach that we are taking. So we are taking a comprehensive approach. We've hired a professional. We are looking to follow the advice of someone who has done sophisticated fundraising type campaigns, and ultimately we need to do it right. Another issue that we've heard that I wanted to make sure I made clear is the public and the various stakeholders we've engaged have made it very clear that the city needs to step back and allow for the community to actually take hold of this. And so we very much understand that the city cannot run this Performing Arts Center. We are working towards a business model where that will not be the case. And even so much as having the community support for the fundraising needs to be led by a bunch of community stakeholders. So moving forward, and in particular, I will be taking a step back. I won't be so much the face of this initiative anymore. I will still be there to support and to help bring the project forward, but it will be led by a group of various individuals, including Tracy Hall, President of the Chamber of Commerce, Judy Carlson, who's with us, Mary Lou Blaisdell, who is with us, and then Trish Klee, who is a member of the Board of Aldermen, who's also stepped up and worked very hard this summer to bring this project forward through the working group that brought this feasibility study before you this evening. So a couple other things I want to make sure I make clear. This report will be online, so I will put it up this evening. I want to make sure that everyone understands that there will be a Facebook page developed now, and so there will be a way for us to produce information and put information out to the public. So Nashua PAC will go live this evening, and that will be, again, a way for folks to either directly communicate with us through a private message or for the differing steering committee to push information out to the general public. Two last comments. Well, I have a couple more comments, but two other comments I would like to make sure I make. One, we need to continue to stay positive relative to this project. I bring this issue up because we are engaging with some pretty high-level individuals and organizations, and they're pretty sophisticated, and we are courting them. And if they get any sense of trepidation on our part, it's going to make our project more difficult relative to the capital fundraising needs. So I want to encourage us all to continue thinking about and acting in a positive manner relative to this project. I know it's been frustrating for everyone involved because of how slow it's been, and I fully recognize and am very much aware of that, and we will continue to be diligent but move this expeditiously along as quickly as possible. The next thing is I want to make sure people understand that we are talking about something that is essentially in its nature a startup. And a startup in its nature will need to change and adapt and evolve, and change isn't necessarily bad, and it's in fact okay so long as we don't lose sight of our goals. So some of the details will evolve, and they have evolved from when we first started. And just as long as we stay true to the goals that we've outlined at the beginning, we will be able to be successful with this project. I will conclude my comments with that, Mr. President. I am sure that there are questions.
Questions?
Yes.
Alderwoman Melissa Golden.
Yes, thank you, Director Cummings. And thank you for the information in the full circle packet. In reference to the memorandum that you gave us regarding new market tax credit financing, and a conversation we had when the operations group met, we had talked about a 501c3 needing to be established. Are you in a position to talk about that this evening, or would you rather that information come from the consultant?
So, if I may, Mr. President, I would actually defer to the consultant who's going to hopefully have come in sometime in October to meet
Okay.
with the steering committee to talk about an overview about how new market tax credits are structured, and how an overview of how the program works, and then in particular his recommendation on how this deal should be structured. I am by no means a new market tax credit expert. They are very complicated. I knew very early on that if we were going to pursue this type of program, that we should get some outside counsel, and he's going to be available to us to help walk us through the nuanced details of how the program works.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Alderman Jettie.
Thank you for this presentation. I've I've received some inquiries from people who have, who saw Mr. T. Bloom appear before the Planning and Economic Development Committee. And they were interested in some of the comments that he made, and I'm wondering whether you are in a position this evening to reply to any of that.
Mr. Cummings?
Well, that's an interesting question. Am I in a position to answer any of those questions? I mean, I could answer those questions. I feel as though by doing so would lend some sort of credibility to them. And I don't know if that's necessarily the best thing. A lot of the points that were made have been brought up time and time again and have been addressed, and I don't know if those answers are satisfactory or whatnot, so they keep being resurrected. Relative to the construction cost figure, all I can say is we put out through a third party, construction estimates through Fennessy Consulting. Fennessy Consulting is a professional cost estimator. That was verified by the architect who was procured, Brunner Cott. That architecture firm looked at this, and so you had 2 checks there, and then we took a third check and had a local construction management firm who knows the area do a review. So you had 3 reviews of the numbers that were produced. And I think the document that was referenced was an older document. There was an updated document in February that showed that something along the lines of $11 million in hard construction costs is what was going to be necessary. So that's one point. I guess the second point is this idea of design build, I would suggest, was always part of the logical thought process on how you'd approach this project. That's the reason why a construction management RFQ was put out at the exact same time as an architectural and engineering RFQ. If we were going to do a design bid build type process, we would only have put out an architecture and engineering type of RFQ, and that was not the intent. And then even in the memo that is before you relative to the new market tax credits, there's a reference to gross maximum price type contracting for a new market tax credit. That is the exact type of contract that's going to need to be entered into. These are not new concepts. These are just the way the construction industry works, and we were planning on following that type of process.
Thank you.
Other questions? Alderman Lopez.
As we're creating a nonprofit, is it a precursor to being able to accept the new market tax credits? Or, because I'm just wondering, nonprofits don't always start on time. They have to get approved by the IRS, they have to have their articles, bylaws. So is that something that might hold it up? Is there an existing nonprofit we could use?
So, Mr. President, if I may,
Director
in your guiding, in one of the documents that you have, there's a strategic guiding document that outlines that we should develop our strategic partnership with the City Arts Nashua, and we will be looking to execute upon that in the next couple weeks.
Okay, I'm very relieved to hear that.
Alderman Jody.
I have another question. You talked about raising money through these tax credits, and a lot of us are not familiar with tax credits. The fact that they're tax credits, it's still private money that's coming forward,
Correct.
right?
Yes.
So could you explain a little bit about that?
I guess if we're going to have a presentation from the tax credit consultant, I'd rather do that there because it is a lengthy topic.
Okay.
Other questions on tonight's presentation?
May I just make a comment?
Alderwoman Melissa Golyer?
Yeah, thank you. Director Cummings, thank you for including the strategic document around an operational plan. I know a number of us around the Horseshoe have been involved in looking at the samples that were sent, and in providing input, probably more than Director Cummings really wanted, in putting this together. But I think when you look at this, and I know it will be posted with the minutes, it speaks clearly to the city not operating the Performing Arts Center, but that it will be operated by a third-party private operator, which is what we certainly heard loud and clear when there was conversation a year ago about this project. So I think it's important to know that, and for the public to know that that was heard, and that's what's being put out there, that it will be privately operated with accountability to a board. But the city will not be involved in the day-to-day operation or programming or set designs and lighting and all those technical aspects that we don't have expertise in.
Anything else? Director Cummings.
Just one final comment. I wanted to make sure I put it out there to the Board of Aldermen, to the general public, that if people want to get involved and you want to volunteer or some way contribute your time, resources, we very much would welcome that. We will have the Facebook page available if you want to reach out to us, or otherwise you can contact me, and I'd be happy to align you with the appropriate entity depending on what your interest level may be. We would very much love to see volunteers get engaged with this project. We would welcome that. Thank you, Mr. President.
I'd just like to comment, it's sort of unfortunate that the project has had to be a little quiet. The fundraising effort, had some initial feasibility work that had to be done. Again, the next phase of it is identifying some major donors. There's a temptation to just run out and do these things, and I think it was utterly important that we, as Director Cummings said, step back and do it right. And I want to thank Director Cummings, first of all, for all the work that he's put into it, and also the members of the steering committee. And I hope I don't forget anybody. Mrs. Hall, Alderwoman Melizzi-Golia, Alderwoman Klee, Alderwoman Wilshire, Alderwoman Kelly, and Alderwoman Schmidt have been at the meetings. Also, Mrs. Carlson, and I see Mr. Lannon, and I think I saw Mary Lou Blaisdell back there somewhere. All of whom have been heavily involved in the steering committee work so far. The operations committee, as Alderwoman Melizzi-Golia said, gave Mr. Cummings more than enough input to work up the RFP, and I think we've finally come to a fairly good structure for that. We're going to next take on the architect and construction manager selection, and I think the fundraising committee has gone far ahead, and from what we see, this is actually a serious project. There is real commitment of money to make this succeed. There's a structure to make it succeed, and I think it's going to result in something that will be a fantastic addition to our downtown. So thank you to all who were involved, and please, everybody, keep it up. Alderwoman Kelly.
Sorry, I know you were wrapping up. I just had a question about the combined $6.5 million. I'm not sure I'm understanding how that.
$2.5 million is going to come from enterprise car sales.
Well, but you bring up a good point. So the capital campaign says $2.5 million. So I would be looking at you, but you're directly behind me. What's that combination?
Director Cummings?
There's nothing to repeat.
Alderman Dowd, can I see that phone for a minute?
So if I may, Mr. President, the sources are essentially 3, 4, depending on how you look at it and how you want to account for it. You have private individual contributions, you have foundations, you have and tax credits. And so the 2.5 is looking to be generated through a combination of CDFA, State of New Hampshire tax credits, and contributions from private individuals or corporations. Separate from that is another source, which is a new market tax credit, which is private funding. And that is very similar to the CDFA type model, except for it's a federal level type program.
And that is an anticipated $6.5 million worth of credit funding, not including the endowment, correct?
Correct. So I want to be clear on this point. So the credit will be potentially just under 6.5. After you take fees away, you're probably somewhere around 4.2 in that range. And then that is the cash that is available for the new market tax credit. Then the 2.5 would be a combination of CDFA tax credits and/or private contributions, either from individuals, businesses, or foundations. As a total, it would be 6.5.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Alderwoman Clee.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to thank everybody that's been on the committee, and I can tell you that I've given them a hard time as to when are we going to start doing the funding and when are we going to do this and do that, because I get the phone calls. And I learned very quickly how the process has to go. And it was difficult to get through my brain that we don't just go out and put our hands out and ask for money. There has to be an entire process. And I really want to commend Director Cummings for his steadfast hard work on it and the rest of the committee members. So thank you.
Alderman Tenza.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Director Cummings, for being here. If I could echo one thing I think he said, which everyone in the city should pay attention to, is that we should all be positive about this. And I think that giving folks more information about the project on an ongoing basis helps people to be more positive. So thank you, Director Cummings, for being here tonight and giving us this presentation. If I could just ask, I think the tax credits is a big part of this, and probably if we could schedule another one of these sessions in the near future so that the board as well as the community can understand how that's going to work and how that's going to affect the financing for this project. I would suggest that's another good idea to keep people informed and positive.
Alderwoman Elizabeth.
Yes, and to that point, Director Cummings, I don't know if it's possible, but when the consultant comes to speak to the steering committee, is it possible to do that where it could be joint steering committee BOA, or do a follow-up presentation to the BOA?
I think we can do it either way. The consultant is reasonably local, as I recall, so it's not hard to schedule meetings.
Okay, I just think it might be helpful for people to hear the same thing at the same time, and for the community
Yeah.
to hear that also. Sometimes you do a presentation a second time and leave out some of the details that help people better understand.
We'll work on that. Any other business? Is there a motion? Alderwoman Wilshire. Motion is to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And we are adjourned at 7:04.